Hello, Eternal Life fans. It's Rowan from the Eternal Life Fan Club. And today I wanted to talk about humanism. It's often called either humanism, sometimes it's called secular humanism. Because humanism is really summarized by this quotation right here: good without God. So it's people trying to rationalize and come up with reasons why people should be good, people should behave morally and ethically without there being a God. That's the basic principle behind humanism. Alright, so we got the basics covered. The question is humanism enough to make people really behave morally, or is there a better alternative to humanism? Because, on paper it looks good, the idea that we can be good without God, okay? But is it realistic? Is it realistic to think that humanism as a philosophy is going to lead people into being very good? I would argue not really. So, from a humanistic standpoint, what are going to be the reasons people would behave good without a God? Firstly, we would think people behave good without a God just because of society, the pressure from society. They don't want to disobey the rules of society because then they have the government to contend with. They have the disapproval of society, which can lead them down, having a bad reputation and this kind of thing. Or in the case of the government, they might be afraid that they'd go to prison for doing something bad, right? So there's the fear of society and government. That's one motivating factor that the humanists have going for them. And then there's another motivating factor, which would be like people say, well, just be good for goodness sake. Just be good because you want to be good. But not everyone does want to be good. So we have to be realistic about that. And, you could say, well, just be good just for the sake of being good. But like a lot of people, they don't care about being good. That's not high on the list of their priorities. So that one's a kind of weak point. That's going to be a weak motivating factor for most people. Some people might be good from a humanist, even on the humanistic standpoint, because they want to feel better about themselves. They want to feel like a good person, like a good moral person, because that helps raise their self-esteem. That's kind of a basic human thing. So there's another reason humanists would behave good. So those are just some of the few motivating factors for why a humanist would be good without God. But I think this perspective is very limited because, you might say, well, you're good without considering a hypothetical God, but how good are you? Okay, there's levels of goodness, and I think when you start to consider a hypothetical God, you're going to have a better time being extra good. You're going to have more motivation to be extra good. Okay, where the humanist would lack, where the humanist approach to morality would be lacking, is they are lacking the fear of a hypothetical God and eternal consequences for your actions. So the humanists think, yeah, there's consequences for our actions as far as society and as far as the government, but that's limited because the humanists, most humanists, the perspective is that death is nothingness and they're going to cease to exist. And so there's no sense of eternal consequences for their actions. Now, I happen to think death is nothingness as well. I happen to think that, when you die, you cease to exist. But I would never... I'm not going to promote that as being... I wouldn't say that as a matter of fact. It just happens to be what I believe. It's possible that there is a life, an afterlife, or a heaven or a hell, or this sort of thing. But this is going to be very beneficial. Having people think that there's a hell or a heaven, it's going to be beneficial for people to think this way, regardless of whether or not it's true. Because if people consider eternal consequences or eternal rewards, that's a lot of extra motivation to be a good person, to be a good member of society, a law-abiding member of society. Because now you're having to contend with the punishment of a hypothetical God, and that's a big deal in the minds of people. And we'd like to think, well, shouldn't these people just be good without fearing this hypothetical God? And can't they just be good just to be a good person? Doesn't that matter to them? yeah, you'd think it would matter to people. But we have to be realistic, and a lot of people, they don't care about being good, and they're, without fearing a hypothetical God, without factoring in a hypothetical God into their philosophy, then they're gonna be bad people. They're gonna break the rules. They're gonna do all kinds of evil things, and they're gonna be immoral, because the natural inclination of, let's face it, a lot of people in the world, I don't know the percentage, but a lot of people in the world, they kind of very high on their list of priorities is just having fun and doing what they want in the moment, just pleasure, hedonism. And when that's your, like, selfishness, when that's like your top priority in life, that can lead you to doing all kinds of evil things if you don't have the moral restraints that fearing the hypothetical God would put on you. But these people, so the humanistic side, it's like, yeah, it's good in theory, but it's limited. How good are these people actually going to be without that? Fear is a very powerful motivation. Think about it. We're controlled by fear. Fear, how many things has fear led your actions, right? Fear leads us to do certain things and leads us to avoid other things. It's a very powerful thing in the human psyche, is fear. And so you cannot argue that this side, the fearing of a hypothetical God, would lead people to have a lot more fear in their life. Fear of doing immoral things. And here's the other thing to consider. These humanists, okay, if you have this perspective that death is nothingness, which, yes, that is what I happen to believe, but let's say that you're really convinced that just death is nothingness, and this is this is the operating system of your mind. You're just thinking, I'm going to die and cease to exist one day. That's it. This can also lead people to be very, very, very wicked and evil. Because if they think, time's almost up, I'm about to die, I'm about to cease to exist, then what's to stop them from going out in a blaze of, bloodshed, where they're just killing people, doing a terrorist attack, murdering people, raping, pillaging, whatever kind of evil thing you can imagine? What's to stop somebody with this mentality from doing that? Because they have no concern over fearing a hypothetical hell or being rewarded with heaven. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, I might as well just do whatever I want. Because they're literally, in their mind, they're about to cease to exist. They're so convinced of that. What's to stop them from doing any kind of evil atrocity? There would be no moral restraint at that point. I would imagine a lot of people, once they're convinced that they're going to die in a certain time span, they're just going to go out and do whatever they want, live it up, because they're about to die. That whole mentality can lead people to just be very wicked and evil. So I would say one of the saving graces of this humanism is transhumanism. Because at least if you're a transhumanist, then now you're starting to consider that you have to live with the consequences of your actions forever. If you're one of these transhumanists who is trying to live forever, if that's your goal, that would make you more morally. So, these people aren't necessarily they're not necessarily in the mindset that they're going to cease, that they're, they don't have to live with the consequences of their actions forever. Because a transhumanist, they're thinking, they're trying to live forever. So this would have them fearing this would have them fearing society to a greater extent, because now they're having to live with their reputation forever. So a transhumanist, if they're living up to this philosophy, to its logical conclusion, they wouldn't want to do anything evil either, because they think, well, they might be caught one day, and then therefore that would destroy their reputation. So that's a much better version of humanism. Like if you're a transhumanist, humanism, that's much better in terms of you probably have more motivation to be a moral person. But if you think your lifespan's only, 70, 80, 90 years, and you're planning on dying one day, what's going to stop that type of person from being a nihilist, thinking nothing matters, therefore better just do whatever the heck they want? Nihilism tends to lead towards a very selfish, almost satanic mentality, where they're thinking, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want at everyone else's expense, because my pleasure's first, because it's YOLO, you only live once, so better focus on my fun, right? That's the satanic mindset. So I'd say people, there are a few things that might prevent someone from having that satanic mindset on the humanist side. But in general, someone on the humanist side, who's a secular humanist, is more likely to adopt that satanic mentality. Because someone who's fearing the hypothetical God, they have all this fear of the hypothetical God, the judgment of the hypothetical God, eternal punishments, eternal consequences, all these sort of things. They're thinking of all these sort of possibilities, which brings more fearing of doing anything immoral. So overall, I think this side is going to be more likely to behave morally, extremely morally, not just like being a neutral person, but like what for instance is going to motivate the humanist to be a humanitarian, to just go out there and help people and feed the poor, and there's going to be less motivating them to do that kind of thing than there would be someone who's fearing the hypothetical God. Because if you're fearing the hypothetical God, you should be thinking, this God might judge me for, being too selfish with my money, being too selfish as far as not spending enough time helping other people. You need to, if you're fearing the hypothetical God, you'd be considering all these very scary possibilities, which should push you into being an extra good, extra moral person. And you're especially wouldn't do anything bad, because you're thinking, well, the hypothetical God could see everything I do. There's nothing, you can't escape judgment. In this world, you could be thinking, well, as long as I don't get caught by the government, or as long as society doesn't find out, then it's really okay, because there'll be no consequences, other than you have to live with your own self. But you see how on the humanistic side, there's just much more of a mindset that you could, if you were very clever about it, you could technically get away with doing very evil things. And that would be, that could push someone, that could tempt them into doing those kind of evil things if they thought they could get away with it. But on this side, fearing the hypothetical God, if you have any kind of intelligence of recognizing the power of this hypothetical God, you really can't get away with anything. You'd think, okay, no, I can't get away with anything. Everything I do, I will eventually get judged for it. And this hypothetical God could have so much power, the power of whether or not I get to live forever. That's a huge amount of power. And if you have a basic survival instinct, as all human beings should have, that should lead you to creating a very, very strict set of rules. Okay, because logically, you would understand that if there is a God, you can't know the rules of God. You would have to guess the rules, and it would make sense, though, if you are guessing the rules of God, if you're considering what the rules of the hypothetical God might be, clearly it would make sense to create a very, very, very strict set of rules, because the stricter you can guess what the stricter you get those rules, hypothetical rules, then the more incentive you have to be an extra good person, because you're thinking, well, I don't know how good I need to be. And that way, if you aim really high, if you happen to fall short a little bit, then you're still going to have better odds of actually, passing the test, right? If on this realm, life is more of a test on this side. And on this side, life isn't really viewed as being a test. You can kind of, it's more like you're just testing yourself, or you're just trying to obey the basic rules of society. That's like the test or something. It's not a profound thing. This is the side, considering the God, that's where the whole test comes into play. That's the whole mentality of living the life as though it were a test. So this side, whether you believe it or not, okay, whether you believe in the hypothetical God or not, it's really not the issue. You don't have to believe in the hypothetical God in order to promote the idea that people should fear the hypothetical God, that they should be living according to rules, and say things like better safe than sorry, the kind of mentality I put forth. It's really applicable to atheists or theists. Like, you don't have to, it's not hinging upon what you happen to believe about God. You can still push the idea of fearing the hypothetical God. You can even encourage people to be a God-fearing atheist, If you're an atheist out there, why not? Why not tell people, hey, be a God-fearing atheist? Try to factor in to your philosophy the idea that there might be a hypothetical God that you might have to be accountable to one day. That this God might be watching you and judging you, and this God might get to determine if you get to live forever. And it's just going to promote morality. Having people fear the hypothetical God, whether it is true or not, is going to promote morality into society, because people are controlled by fear. If they don't fear the hypothetical God, they're less likely to be a great, outstanding, moral person. It's the fear of the hypothetical God that really encourages you and pushes you to be all that much more better, because you're not just living according to the rules of society, you're living according to the hypothetical rules of a hypothetically very, 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 very strict, wrathful, judgmental God that you might have to be accountable to. And that's going to make you behave way better. And so why wouldn't we want to promote that idea to the entire world? Because that's going to make people behave more morally, and ultimately that can trickle down into our life. It's safer for us, for the people who are trying to live forever physically, it is safer for us to have a bunch of God-fearing people out there in the world who have moral restraints because they're thinking they're going to be accountable to this God, they're going to be judged and everything. That is going to benefit us, because living in a world with a bunch of fearful people who are trying to obey a bunch of rules, moral guidelines, that's obviously better than living in a world with a bunch of humanists thinking that they're on their way out and they're going to die and cease to exist. And that could lead them to a kind of satanic mentality. This could lead people to being a serial killer. This could lead people to doing all kinds of evil things. So, yes, it's good in theory, but this is better. This is much better in terms of if you understand human motivation and human psychology and how much fear plays into all of that. Fear, like we like to think, okay, we could just be motivated by just love. Loving people and this hippie idea of just love everyone and everything. Yeah, it's good in theory, but in reality, humans are more controlled by fear of punishment, fear of suffering. And that is something that only the fearing the hypothetical God can provide. Because as much as you fear the government or society, it's not the same. It's not the same as fearing eternal torment in hell. So the more people we can convince of hell, okay, the better it's going to be for our safety and our eternal life. We want people to be controlled and restrained by this fear. We want fearful people out there. We don't want fearless people. Fearless people is the mindset of criminals. It's the Joker mindset. It's that nihilistic, do whatever thou, satanic, do what thou wilt attitude. See, because here's the thing, okay? A lot of people, they are not afraid of eternal nothingness. That doesn't bother them. Okay, they don't mind the idea of dying and ceasing to exist. So if they're not afraid of oblivion, eternal nothingness, non-existence, then what's going to really cause them to be moral? Because in the grand scheme of things, if they're thinking whatever they do, they're going to end up with the same result. They're going to end up with eternal nothingness. And that could lead to absolute degeneracy, immorality, anything. Because if you're thinking you're going to end up with eternal nothingness anyways, that would lead you to think, well, nothing matters. I can just I can be evil. I can do whatever the heck I want because there'll be no consequences. I'm going to end up in the same place anyways, regardless of how good I am or how many rules I obeyed or whatever. And it could lead people to be very, very evil. But on this side, this is why the fear of the hell is such a great concept. We need more of the idea of, we need to resurrect that old concept of hellfire and brimstone and true fear of God, making people very scared that if they don't behave morally, they might go to hell. And that's just a great thing for society. So you can see the difference here clearly. Humanism versus fear of God. What's going to be the better way of motivating people to actually behave morally? I think we have a winner. Ding, ding, ding. This is the winning side. So whether you believe it or not, at the end of the day, none of us know whether this is true. None of us know whether there's a God or not. None of us know if there's a heaven or hell. So the best we can do is encourage people to consider this whole thing as a possibility. We don't have to put it forth as a fact. We shouldn't put it forth as a fact because that's just intellectually dishonest and it's going to make us look dumb. We should put this forth as a hypothetical possibility that people should be considering, and at the very least, they should be acting as though this is true. You should live your life as though there is a God, just in case. Better safe than sorry. It's the precautionary, safer thing to do. So it increases your chances of living forever. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to tell people, hey, look, it doesn't matter if you believe this or not. Stop caring about your beliefs so much. Stop focusing on what you believe. Like we've all been wrong about what we believe. So it's not about what we believe. It's about what's possible. It's about possibilities. And this is possibly true. So that's it. Live your life like you're going to be judged by a very wrathful, strict God. Okay? This is good. And it's going to make you a better person too. Literally, it's going to make you a better person. Who's to say, how much the fear of the hypothetical God can work towards making you an extremely moral, good person? It can have a profound impact. So I would encourage everyone to adopt this fearful mindset. And the more people that can adopt this mindset, the better world we're going to have. And now, obviously, if someone has a very, very low intelligence and they can't guess the rules properly, like let's say someone is trying to guess the rules of the hypothetical God, because that's what I'm promoting here, that we have to guess the rules. We can't just turn to some holy book. Some people, we have to face the facts that some people are going to guess their guess is going to be really dumb as far as what would the rules be. They're going to guess something really retarded. And some people are going to slip through the cracks. Okay? But most people with a basic common sense would, when they're guessing the rules of the hypothetical God, they would get a pretty smart, intelligent guess. I think they would guess that basic things that most people agree are evil, they would guess those kind of things would be punished by the hypothetical God, right? Such as murder, rape, and basic moral concepts. Most people are going to just kind of assume, okay, those are the things that the God would judge, right? Now, some other retarded person might just assume, the fear of God, the God wants me to do all this evil stuff or whatever. Like, look, there's going to be those people who are just bad at guessing, and they're going to try to use this for doing evil things. Like, that's just going to be an unavoidable thing. People are going to slip through those cracks. There's going to be those idiot people out there. But for most people, this is going to make them a better person, okay? And some people, although I promote fearing the hypothetical God and guessing the rules, a step down from that, it's still better than this side, okay? Still better than humanism, but a step down from my version of this would be just people just taking the Bible as God's word or whatever. It's still a better moral framework than this crap, okay? Okay, there's still at least an element of fear of the God. If you just take the Bible as God's word, if you take the Bible as the rules of the God, it's still going to lead you down a more fearful path and a path of more morality and a structured life of rules and that kind of thing. So it's just better all around that people, and I'm not saying that they have to believe. You can be on this side. You can consider yourself on this side without believing. I have to emphasize that. You could be an atheist, remain an atheist forever, and still consider yourself on this side of the morality spectrum, where at least you're considering the possibility of a God. You're acting like there might be a God judging you. You're guessing the rules. That's all you need to do to consider yourself on this side of the spectrum rather than the humanistic side, really, which is like, what is this? It's lacking in fear. That's what it is. It's fearlessness. They're not fearing any hypothetical deities. What is that? That's not smart. You should be fearing the hypothetical deities, and that should be making you a better person. And that's going to increase your chances of living forever. Okay? And of course, if you're on this side, if you're on the fear of the God side, you better not trust in this thing right here. Okay? You better not be expecting there to be a heaven. You can hope for a heaven. You can wish for a heaven. You can wish for some kind of salvation, but don't live your life as though there's going to be another chance, okay, to live forever in heaven. No. If you're on this side, you're fearing the possibility of God, but you definitely should be fearing death itself. You better just consider the worst case scenario, which is that if you die, you don't get another chance. You only get one life. You just, that death is the end. Now, if it gives you some kind of comfort or whatever, sure, you can't help what you believe. Like, some people believe in heaven, some people don't. I happen not to believe in heaven. I don't judge the people who believe in heaven. It's not their fault. They're convinced that there's a heaven. Okay, that's fine. But if you're convinced that there's a heaven, don't let that stop you from fearing death and living as though you need to live forever physically. That's my concern. That's really my biggest concern for people on this side of the spectrum, is that if they start to get too wrapped up into this concept of God and this idea of a salvation, they might start to lose their fear of death. And that would be the worst thing that can happen to these people. Okay? The second concern I have for these people is that in guessing the rules of God, they think God is very forgiving. They get this concept from religion. It goes back a long ways. This idea of the forgiving God, that God is very merciful. He'll forgive you. Just say a prayer and God will forgive you. This kind of mentality. That's a dangerous mentality as well. Because if you're just thinking, well, God's just going to forgive you for anything, then you've lost the whole fear. The whole fearing the God. That's the best part. That's the most important asset to this side. And if you just think God's going to forgive you and be all merciful, then what's the whole point of being on this side in the first place? The whole point on being on this spectrum is that you're fearing a very, very wrathful, unforgiving God. Or at least you're trying to account for that possibility. So people can just get too wrapped up into the idea that God's very forgiving and merciful. That is a danger of this side as well. And then, of course, I've talked about the dangers of this side. The biggest danger of this side is thinking you can get away with things. Okay? So it's a lack of preparedness. It's the little pig building his house out of straw. That's what this side is. It's thinking you can live however you want, and the only one you're going to be accountable to is society. That you're going to be accountable to the government. Well, wake up, people. There might be a hypothetical God you also might have to be accountable to. That's the issue here. Thank you. I think I've said it all. That's my piece here. Thank you, and may you live forever.